On this week's episode, we go to the great state of Kentucky where we find one of the most unbelievable things we've ever seen in looking at a house on PropertyLens. Stay tuned for Property of the Week. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, ships at sea, it is time for another episode of Property of the Week with PropertyLens. For those of you who don't know, I am Bob Frady, CEO and co-founder of PropertyLens, and with me, as always,
John Sigmund, president and co-founder of PropertyLens.
we have a really interesting case that we stumbled upon this week. I'm still kind of shocked by what we've seen. For those of you who don't know, we were playing around outside of Cincinnati, Ohio, that whole area. One of our folks lives there. And we noticed this property, and let's see what the PropertyLens report has to say about it.
This property is relatively new. It's got a beautiful river view. When you look at it as a potential buyer, you might think this is the ideal spot to be in.
Of course, we go to PropertyLens, type in an address. Now, normally we would do that, but for the expedience sake, we've already run this address. It's 585 Manhattan Boulevard in Dayton, Kentucky, which I guess is just across the river from Cincinnati. The word river is very important. 4 beds, 4 baths, 4,000 square feet. And we pull up the PropertyLens report, and here's what we see. It looks pretty good. The property score is 725, so it's in good condition. But the Safe Place score shows us one thing. What's that little red button up there say, John?
Ooh, it says flood.
And this house is in a flood zone. And the surprising part is not that the house is in a flood zone, but you'll see what's really surprising about it later on. So when we go through this house, we see here's the snapshot. We've had a possible damaging event. It is in a flood zone. It's not flipped. We expect $12,000 in repairs over the next couple of years. Had some tax increases and insurance increases over each of the last 5 years. Roof's in good condition. It is really an interesting thing that was done. And I don't necessarily blame homeowners as much as I blame the city for something like this happening. Because here's what you look at. And before we get into the details of the report, a little bit concerned about the flood. So I got the street view of this house. And here's the street view of the house. Lovely house.
That's a beautiful house.
Very nice. You can see there's a river behind it. But then if we turn around, what's that?
That is a levee, as in the song.
When the levee breaks, you've got no place to stay. Oh, mommy, you gotta go. Choose your weapon. But this house was built between a river
On the wrong side of the levee.
and a levee. This levee does not protect anyone in this house from that river that's on the other side. And it's an AE flood zone, according to FEMA. So my question is, how did the city ever allow this land to be built on if there's a levee behind it?
Empty land doesn't provide any tax base.
There you go. I was actually driving through the Midwest last week, and I saw some levees, and I saw some houses on each side of the levee. And I'm like, why would you ever build a house on the wrong side of the levee? The levee is there for a reason. And this, to me, is arrogance more than anything else. Beautiful home, not cheap to buy, but there is a levee on the other side. Now,
On the
people
wrong
didn't build
side.
that levee just to say, here's a good spot for a levee. They built it because at some point this property flooded, and they said, we need this thing to be this high to protect everybody behind the levee. But everybody in front of it, listen, I'm a risk-taking kind of guy. I don't think I could ever bring myself to buy a house that's on the wrong side of the levee. Your mileage may differ, but to me, how does the city ever allow this? And you're going to have flood insurance because that levee tells you that's how high the water can potentially get without breaching the levee.
So even moving your valuables to the second floor may not be enough.
Everything should be up there because anything down here is below the level of the levee. Everything needs to be up top. Some people are like, that's only once every 100 years that might happen. It's like, well, yeah, or it might happen twice in 2 years because flood doesn't respect math. It just comes when it comes. Yeah, flood failed math class. So that's the most shocking thing about this. Nothing wrong with the house itself. The house looks great. We'll go through the report. You can see for yourself how the house looks. I am just shocked that a municipality would allow this area to be built. So it was built in 2015, so it's only 11 years old. It's had 3 owners in 15 years, and that might be a deed change. We'll see. Doesn't require major renovations. Repair costs are relatively limited. What are some of the concerns that we see at this house, John?
Besides the need to have good swimming skills, It's near some brownfields. There's some sex offenders in the hood, 8 of them. The water heater, we have no record of replacement. It's 11 years. That's about the expected lifespan of a water heater. Pretty high taxes for the property. Now, understand that given the value of the property, you may look at the tax bill and go, well, it's not much. They've been increasing at a fairly rapid rate, and you hope that that levels off so you know what you're getting yourself into.
What are some of the key questions that PropertyLens tells you to ask?
Flood mitigation measures, electrical system, pretty standard stuff, really, for most houses. Radon, Kentucky is pretty high for radon. Most of the Midwest is. So if it's got a basement, you would definitely want to make sure your sump pumps are working, though. If you're all the way up to your roof, it's not going to make that much of a difference. Mold, because you are by the river, it's always going to be moist. We mentioned the water heater up front. It's probably tacked into the plumbing system, but you're probably due for a water heater. You'd probably want to keep some type of vehicle that floats like a boat sitting next to your house.
You have a canoe at least in your garage.
Just in case. That's all I'm saying.
The thing that sticks out here, the second question, what's the current condition of the foundation and are there any signs of settling? Rivers cause land shift, and that land isn't necessarily, it's rare that you're going to find bedrock next to a river. What is it that your foundation is doing? Because that's not a today issue, but that's an issue. Let's say you buy this house and you want to sell it in 7 years. Okay, now the foundation's 20 years old or almost 20 years old. That's when you start to see issues really present themselves. So make sure you're walking around, taking a really solid look at the foundation for any cracks, for any buildup of soil, for anything that might indicate that, hey, there's something off on this location. Here's our estimated repair costs. It's an 11-year-old house. So, it's going to look pretty good for the most part. Your water heater, like you said.
And it does. Other than the water heater, you're solid.
Yep, looks pretty good. Your roof looks fine.
Given where this property is and the fact that it's behind a levee, I would want to know if you have to actually have a sump pump for your sewer line, because you may have to pump your own sewage up to a line. You see that on good properties on hillsides and things like that, and the people that are on the downhill side actually have to pump their wastewater up to the line running in the street. Well, this line running in the street, it might not actually be there. It might be on the other side of the levee. There's a lot of questions given this that I would want to be asking.
Everything looks pretty cool. From an insurance standpoint, you're going to have a range of about $2,100 to $6,000. So it's all over the board. If you're financing this, you're going to have an NFIP policy or a private flood policy because flood is not a covered peril. And you can't get much more dangerous unless your house was in the middle of the river than this sort of location. And it's going to cost about $1 million to repair. The last listing price was 1.2. So a lot of times you'll insure up to the sales price of the house. In this case, that's just fine. So you don't have anything unusual in terms of insurance for this house, except for the peril. Here's all the information about the property. And it was listed in 2022 and not sold. So they didn't get what they wanted. They took it down. So property taxes are sort of all over the board. And it looks like this property might have been reassessed at some point. That's okay. Here's the views. Spectacular views. You're right on the river, practically in the river. And you can see that there's a partial down slope to the river. So people are thinking, yeah, the river's down there. But that levee behind you tells you a piece of information that no one else is going to tell you. And the first thing you should ask is, why is the levee on the other side of the building?
The simple answer to why the levee is on the other side of the house is because if it were behind the house, it would destroy the view of the river.
Well, there's that. So this is a lovely house. No aspersions on the house itself. It's had one wind event, so relatively small. If you look at the aerial view, you can go back to 2016. You can see that this house was built, and then they started building it a whole lot more around it. Roof's in fine condition. Looks good. If we go in, it's 11 years old, into a 30-year time span, it'll cost you about $13,000 to replace it. And it's in fine condition to be. Got some hard water in this area. Nothing too terrible, but enough to, if you have a tankless water heater system, then it might invalidate the warranty on a tankless water heater system. And it's got a little bit of risk of termites. These are all the building permits, but nothing has been done to the property that has been permitted. So it doesn't say that there's any improvements, but it looks like we have the original permits, but not necessarily anything since. So there hasn't been a lot of work done upkeep from a permitted standpoint. And here we are. Here's our
That looks
flood.
like it's in a flood zone.
Here's our flood map. It's like, I cannot get over the fact that they allowed that building. Unless somebody from the city said, that levee, that's just crazy people building something. It's way too high.
But if you look
So,
at that map, you see the street, and then underneath the street, there's that darker reddish thing. That's the levee.
yeah.
And then behind the levee is showing you a moderate risk level, which is a 500-year flood zone.
Yep.
And then you see down in the bottom right-hand corner, all the properties just outside of the 500-year flood zone.
Yep.
That's even with the levee, there's still a 500-year flood zone.
Yep.
So what are you thinking if you're on the wrong side of that levee?
Yeah. And you can't blame the city when, oh, nobody helped us. It's like, you should know this. You're in a flood zone. And that's the thing that we see about this property. It's in a 100-year flood zone. Flood insurance is required if you have a mortgage, and we do recommend it, of course. What's interesting is there's no lomas or lomers in this area. So no one's even tried to get out of the flood zone, neither the builder nor the person.
Well, you'd have to build up at least as tall as the levee.
Yeah, it
And
is.
that's a pretty big hill.
We're making one assumption here. The assumption that we're making is that the levee is there for a reason, and it's the height that it is for a reason. Now, something may have changed, that is no longer valid, but FEMA doesn't think so. This is the most recent flood map that we have for this area, and it's like, oh no, you're still in the pond. Just stunning, just stunning. From a climate standpoint, nothing big. It's this area of Kentucky. It's fine. Crime, relatively average. It's moderate. Like John always likes to say,
The U.S. is relatively safe, so C's are okay.
there you go. What's interesting is here's the sex offender map, because we did show 8 sex offenders. Here's the levee. So what you're making the assumption is that the sex offenders won't climb over the levee to get to your house.
Yeah, I was just about to say, the levee's not there to protect you from the flood. They're to protect you from the sex offenders. I don't think
Yes,
that
it's
that's
just
why levees are built, but maybe it works. I don't know.
this river configuration reminds me a little bit of Nashville and how everybody was shocked when Nashville flooded. It's like, but if you know anything about hydrology, it wasn't a shock at all. Flood is a naturally occurring phenomena. It's occurred as long as there's been an earth. Take your guess on how long the earth has been here, but there's always been floods. And they're going to come again, despite your best efforts to stop them. They're just going to show up. Might not be now, might not be next week, might not be for 30 years. Might be twice in a row. Who knows? But you got to be aware of that when you're buying a house like this. Neighborhood's great. No noise, no continuous noise for airports, rails, and roads. They've got pretty good preparation for natural disasters, which is great. Not super walkable and not a lot of public transportation options along the levee. Even the buses won't go there. So yeah, you're right across from Cincinnati. Here's all the points of interest. So if you're curious about that sort of stuff, you can see where childcare, colleges, EV stations, private schools, and public schools all are for this location. John, you had pointed out mold and radon are issues that people need to take a look at. So what do you do when you have these issues?
When you are getting your house inspected, you definitely have the inspector give you a mold test, water test, and a radon test.
Yep. And they're all extra. They're not part of the standard inspection. You have to ask your inspector to do those tests, and they're well worth it. You might spend an extra $200 or $300 on these tests, but better that than getting lung cancer because you weren't aware that radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer. Here's your contaminated sites. There's a brownfield about a half mile away. And a brownfield is when you've got a place that released toxic chemicals at some point. And then somebody said, got to remediate that before you build on it again.
Yeah, that's a little weird one. Mary Ann Theater.
Yeah.
Did they have some really stinky plays or movies? I mean, what was the cause of that?
This play is caustic. This play will hurt your health. Shut it down. Maybe that's why the place shut down, is because it was poisonous.
Maybe. I don't know, but it's just like, that's I've not seen that one before.
There are some former clandestine labs around here, so a little far
In
away, mile and a half,
Kentucky?
mile. Surprisingly, um, pipelines, power plants, Superfund sites are a mile away. Toxic release facilities are about a mile away. So you're kind of far. The one thing that you're close to is an underground storage tank that's a quarter mile away, which is Hyundai Petroleum. And listen, there's not a whole lot you can do about that as a homeowner. If that field leaches, it tends to go out about 1,000 feet.
A fifth of a mile, so you're probably okay.
Fire, law, medical, all pretty good. Here's where the facilities are. You probably have to drive around the levee to get to this one, but you can see where the fire station's, and it's Woodlawn, which is Waterworks Road. Whenever you're in a place called Waterworks Road, you know you're going to flood. Come on.
Well, yeah. Flood Street, Water Street, Waterworks. Road names give you a deep clue. Burnt
Yeah.
Branch Road. Bet you're a wildfire out.
Oh, you're on River Street? Oh,
Right.
guess what? Insurability looks pretty good. It's not a bad market. And then we get to our property timeline, so you can see what's happened over time. And really, not a ton. You just have a lot of roof imagery that's been on here. Let's say that you were looking to buy this location on 585 Manhattan Boulevard in Dayton, Kentucky. What are the first three things that you'd be asking about?
Well, I'd be asking to have my head examined because this thing is such a flood risk. I would not be buying it. But if I were going to buy this property, the first thing that I would do is I would go look up floods in Cincinnati. How often an occurrence is this, at least historically? And yes, past performance does not predict future performance, but it at least gives you an indicator. And so that looks like the Ohio River. How wide does it really get would be one of the first things that I would do. First question coming out is, well, how much is flood insurance going to set me back? If my house has a replacement cost somewhere between $1 million and 1.2, and we have a flood, NFIP insurance only covers the first $250,000. That's a lot to take on, especially if the flood goes up and hits that levee. You can bet you're going to use all of that flood policy and more. What's a supplemental policy also going to cost? So that's my 1A and my 1B, or you can take them as 1 and 2. Second question, what's the water heater look like? Have you replaced it? Some municipalities require permits for water heater replacement. Some do not. So it might have been replaced and nobody knows because it's not required to know. But that would be question number 2. And then my third question, I think, would focus on just general access. That road is behind the levee. It's not like all of a sudden they, put a tunnel in the levee. That would be sort of defeating its purpose. So how far do you have to go to get to anything? We don't show that, but this looks like it's out on a cul-de-sac, which is the nice way in French to say dead end. How far do you have to go to get to anywhere where you can then make egress? Because if you are in an event where you have to get out, you're behind everybody else in that event who also has to get out.
You better make sure your cardio is good so you can run up that levee and come down the other side.
Yeah, that might be it. So those would be my 3. What about you? What are your top? And let's see if we can keep it to 3.
So if I were looking at purchasing 585 Manhattan Boulevard in Dayton, Kentucky, understand one thing. It looks like a beautiful house. It's got this fantastic view of the river. So from that standpoint, I don't feel a lot of danger. But number one, I would ask for some clarity from the city about the flood zone. Why was this house even allowed to be built in a flood zone? So if you don't get a good answer from the city, then I would apply for a LOMA. Go to FEMA and say, hey, the city allowed this to be built, so give me an exception and get me out of the flood zone in the first place. So that's number one. Clarify the flood situation. you're on the wrong side of the levee. And if you're risk averse, that means something to you. If you don't care, or whatever, then great. You get a great view, super nice. The second thing is the water heater. When does it need to be replaced? What's the process for doing that? Do I need a permit? All that stuff. And then the third is just the environmental data, the mold, the radon, and the water. I would have all of those tested as part of the pre-inspection because, listen, most real estate agents don't know the first thing about radon, or it's not a required disclosure in most states, and neither is flood in most states. This is definitely a buyer beware house, and you need to do your research ahead of time. And for $70, we're basically giving you all this information going in so you, as the buyer, can make a clear-headed decision about what you want to do. So those are the three things, flood, water heater, and environmental cleanup. So those are the three things I'd be looking at. But otherwise, it's a lovely house. It's a lovely house. Spectacular view.
Sure.
Even if you have to look at Cincinnati,
If
some
you don't
people like
mind
that.
living with the fishes.
Yeah. The fishing's good because it comes right to your living room. So, yeah, that's it from my standpoint. Jerry, you got anything you want to add?
Nope. That's a beautiful property, just in a nice location, but on the wrong side of the levee.
On the wrong side of the levee. All right. So for this week's episode of Property of the Week, I'm Bob Frady.
I'm John Sigmund.
Hit that like button. It makes us feel better about ourselves. And until next time, see you soon.